Harry Potter. Harry Potter. Now that's a name I've not heard in a long time. A long time. Hey folks, this is another one that I'm cranking out kind of quickly because a thing happened and I ended up having more thoughts about it than I expected. And so yeah, you get this. We have the first confirmed casting for the upcoming HBO TV series version of Harry Potter, that being John Lithgow, who will be playing Dumbledore. Now, this had been rumored a few weeks, maybe even a month ago. I didn't say anything at the time because casting rumors, that's the kind of thing I avoid commenting about, partially because they can change at any moment. About half the time, the casting rumor is either just fan casting that broke containment, or it is something that is being floated by the actors' PR team to gauge interest or possibly even stealthily lobby them for the part. So that doesn't mean that it's actually going to happen. And not to mention, even when it is legitimate that they are looking at the part, actors pass on stuff all the time for a litany of reasons, be it scheduling, be it just deciding that they're not a good fit for the part, deciding they don't want to work with that director, seeing another project they want more, etc., 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 etc. But it has now been confirmed. John Lithgow confirmed it to, I believe it was Screen Rant, that he has accepted the part of Dumbledore, which is disappointing. I don't want to belabor this issue too much, and I'm going to stress right now, while I think it is fully valid for people to voice their displeasure and disappointment with actors accepting roles within this show, don't harass anybody. Don't. And this will especially be doubly or triply or quadruply true when we start getting casting announcements for the kids. Leave the kids alone. For real. And if you ever find yourself wondering, well, what counts as harassment? I have a very simple metric for this. Don't be an asshole. Because you know when you're being one. You act like you don't, but you do. And you have the excuses in your head. Well, yeah, this is kind of an asshole thing to do, but it's okay because. It's okay because they did something I don't like. Because I feel it validates this thing. Because, drop the excuse. You know when you're being an asshole. So just don't. Okay? But if you want something slightly more concrete, again, voice your displeasure by all means. But the instant you actually direct it specifically at somebody, you try and force your opinion in front of their face, in their DMs, adding them on social media, or if you are an influencer yourself, encouraging your viewers to do that on your behalf. Yeah, that's harassment. Don't do it. That having been said, it is disappointing. Partly because I just like John Lithgow as a performer. I always have. I've always thought he was extremely good at pretty much anything that he was in. And also it does leave me in a position of, finding less value in the times where he appeared to be more on the supportive side of LGBTQIA plus issues and even trans issues specifically. If you weren't aware, back in the 80s adaptation of The World According to Garp, he played a trans woman. Now, I haven't seen the movie, so I can't personally vouch for it, but from what I've heard from people who have seen it, and I know I'm on the record as saying don't cast cisgender people as trans characters, and I do stand by that, but also the 80s, casting a trans actor was basically never going to happen back in the 80s. So I'll give a pass for something that old. And from what I've heard from people who have seen that, it's possibly the best trans representation from the entire decade. It's certainly one of the only instances in which a trans character, specifically a trans woman, is not a punchline. She's not a joke. So that certainly at the time had value, had meaning. And more recently, he was involved in sort of the pitch video kind of reading of the Marlon Bundo book that John Oliver and the team at Last Week Tonight put out in sort of staunch opposition to, at the time, Vice President Mike Pence's very anti-queer stances. And John Lithgow participated in that. I believe, if I remember correctly, he actually voiced the stink bug, who was the stand-in for Pence himself.
Boy bunnies don't marry boy bunnies. Boy bunnies have to marry girl bunnies.
I can't help but find a little less value in those things now, knowing that at this point he's willing to support somebody who is so vehemently against trans people. And this, like the last couple times I've even touched vaguely on anything related to Rowling or Harry Potter, I am going to note we are not debating whether or not J.K. Rowling is transphobic. Take it as a given at this point. I'll put links in a pinned comment if you need to be brought up to speed. But honestly, at this point, if you don't know what she's been doing or saying, that is at this point willful ignorance. And I'm directing that both at viewers, but also at Lithgow and his agent and whoever else was involved in the decision. If they don't know, it's because they've gone out of their way to not learn. They know, and you know, that it's in the air. It's one of the really frustrating things for me is when I see people, I guarantee 99.9% of the times in bad faith, but try and say, J.K. Rowling just said this, how is that transphobic? And then they quote me something from statements she made in 2020. It's been 5 years since then. She's said a lot and done a lot more since then. So even if you didn't think she was then, if you are choosing to only look at that and not look at anything new, that is willful ignorance, and I'm not dealing with it. But again, it creates a situation where, at best, Lithgow is willing to put his head in the sand and just not look into it and think about the damage. I mean, that's frustrating. That's frustrating, and it's disappointing. There's a couple of other aspects about this that are interesting and are actually what I want to talk about a bit more, but I did just need to touch on that in the first place because that is the actual headline. He's been cast. He said yes. So that little gag I opened with at the front end, do you realize how long ago this show was announced? April of 2023. Almost 2 years ago. This thing got announced for the first time. That is a big gap of time for the first casting announcement. Now, like, that wouldn't be so big a gap of time if, like, the initial announcement had been like, and here's the cast, and then it was like 2 years until we got, say, our first proper trailer. That would be a bit more reasonable. But for it to be 2 years since you publicly broadcast that you're doing this, to even have your first person cast in it, that seems odd. That at best, and this is the absolute best possibility that I can think of, at best it means you announced it really prematurely. Basically, as soon as the ink dried on the agreement with Rowling to do this, you announced it, which was a foolish thing to do if you weren't actually prepared to fast track the entire development. The other thing I'll mention about Rowling is that she is being directly involved in this. This isn't a case like Hogwarts Legacy, which I already have talked about repeatedly, about how buying that does still support her, regardless of whether or not she was directly involved in the game, which she wasn't really. She didn't even come up with the plot, so far as I know. She did sign off on it because she has that degree of control over the property. But, like, she didn't come up with the scenario. She didn't, come up with the characters. She obviously doesn't know how to design a game, so she didn't do any of that. But, like, this, she is going to be pretty directly involved. And I think that might be part of the reason why so little progress has happened up to this point. Because as I said, I don't like to deal too much with rumors, but word has been for a little while that they are having trouble casting this thing. People don't want to do it. And they don't want to do it because of her. Now, don't take this necessarily as like thinking that people are standing on principle like, no, we support trans people and we won't support you. No. I think in most cases it's just looking at the drama that would be involved with doing this project and going, that's not worth it. Because the reality is at this point, any actor considering these parts even if they agree with Rowling's positions and beliefs and everything else that she has ever said about trans people, trans women especially, even if they agree, I bet you a lot of them were still looking at this and going, okay, yeah, but I don't need this to become my life, because there is no way you get cast in this and don't get asked to comment on her transpositions. And if you say you don't agree, that's going to make your life a living hell. She's already shown how harshly she has responded to the fact that Daniel Radcliffe and Emma Watson have, to varying degrees, voiced their support of trans people, or that they believe that she is wrong. So, like, if you accept this part, if you don't agree with her, you're going to have to pretend you do for at least as long as the project goes on, if not for the rest of your or her life, whichever is shorter. But if you are neutral on the subject, you're not going to be able to stay neutral. You're kind of going to be pressured to suddenly have an opinion. But even if you agree, she stirs up so much crap at this point. Like, it's the only thing she does anymore. Yes, she still releases books that basically only seem to get read by people either spite buying because they support her transphobia, or by people who decide they're gonna pull through it and like give a full breakdown of everything wrong with it, because I've not heard very good things about those books. But she's not really known for much of anything other than stirring up shit at this point. I mean, yes, she's still known for Harry Potter, and that's honestly only because Harry Potter as a brand is, I think, too big to be eclipsed. But if it wasn't that kind of mega brand, honestly, she might be better known as a shit stirrer than literally anything else. And it's pretty close as is. And again, even if you agree with her, if you're an actor, you're probably looking at that going, I don't need this to overtake my entire life. Because you are going to be assumed by people who agree with her that if you signed on, that you do. And that's going to drag you into the drama. And the people who think that it's a bad thing that you're doing this, they're going to be on your case forever, and they will judge you. And again, strictly from a perspective of your career, it's probably not a great idea to alienate huge swaths of your potential future audience. Which is probably why someone like the character of Dumbledore was the first one cast, because Lithgow said flat out, he's basically signing on to have this be the entire final stretch of his career. He is going to be in his mid-late 80s by the time this wraps up, assuming it gets all the seasons that it is planned for. I actually doubt it will, but let's for the moment assume it does. He is at an age where he's just accepting, like, this is the last thing I'll do with my career for all intents and purposes. So for him, while I don't know if he truly understands the size of the drama he's going to be dragged into by association, he at least doesn't really have to worry about what it does to his career after this, because there won't be much time left to be morbid about it, frankly. So it makes sense that a character where you need an actor of advanced age is the first one cast. But there's another interesting thing about John Lithgow beyond just the age. You may or may not recall that while Rowling was not as directly involved in the films as she is going to be in this TV series, she did have a couple of very strong rules that she had for those adaptations. One of the big ones was she wanted UK actors only. She very specifically did not want Americans cast in the part. John Lithgow is American. And in my mind, that lends credence to the idea that they're having trouble casting this in the UK. Because, like, understand, plenty of folks in the US know what's going on with her, but in her home country, it's an even bigger issue. It's an even bigger deal. She is headlined all the damn time. She's making public statements. She's supporting people who are holding these rallies and doing these things in that country. So whatever crap gets stirred up by her, we're getting a fair amount of it over here. It's way worse over there. And I think it's really telling that they had to find an American. Now, that's not me predicting that they're going to have to cast Americans for every part or anything like that. But I do think that casting the first major person being an American and being old enough that he doesn't really have to worry about his career after this, yeah, that not only makes sense, to me, it lends credence to the idea that they're having trouble. They're having trouble moving forward with this. Now that they have cast somebody, I suspect that other casting announcements are going to start to happen a bit quicker, partially because anyone who is on the fence about this is going to be gauging the response to Lithgow, how much people seem to turn on him, what the response is, whether he is given grace and leeway, or whether people just kind of write him out of their entertainment lives. And I think a lot of people are going to be looking at that response and then gauging whether or not it's worth it for them to sign on. And not that I think that it's going to be such a soft response that a bunch of people go, oh, okay, this isn't a big deal, and then sign on. But it's easier to sign on for something, even if it's going to bring a lot of drama and nonsense with it, if you feel like you know what the shape and size of that drama and nonsense is. You can at least prep yourself for it. It's the uncertainty, I think, that has held a lot of people back from actually signing on. I'm kind of focusing on actors, and especially someone like John Lithgow, because he has his choice of roles. He can choose what he wants to do. And those are the actors that I'm going to be, frankly, the most judgmental of for accepting parts in this. Because yes, accepting roles in this, watching it, supporting it, talking about it without bringing attention to the problems with Rowling and the fact that, lending any support to this bolsters her, that's a problem. All of that is a problem. Again, I'm not actually calling for a boycott, but I am going to bring to your attention the fact that if you watch this thing, if you're an influencer and you talk about it, if you're an actor who is of the size that you actually have your choice of roles and you choose to do this to help this get made, they all support her, and supporting her is supporting transphobia. That's a fact. And if that makes you uncomfortable, you're not uncomfortable or mad at me, or at least you shouldn't be. You're uncomfortable with a fact. And I'm asking you to grapple with that fact. So you do whatever you're going to do, but don't pretend like what you decide to do has no impact on her, and impacting her has no impact on trans people. I'm not going to let you pretend that's the case. Sorry. But anyways, I am going to give a little bit more grace. Well, I'm honestly going to have the utmost sympathy for any child actors cast in this. I feel real bad for them. I honestly tend to feel real bad for child actors cast in almost anything. It's a child acting industry has a long history of chewing people up and spitting them out and doing a lot of damage, but especially being involved in something like this, especially because if they're casting accurate to the age, they're going to be 10 or 11 at the time that they're cast, that they're not going to have a proper perspective, a lot of them, on what it is they're even signing up for. So them I just feel bad for. When we start talking about crew who's just on the set, people rigging the lights, set decorators, the production assistants, and anyone who's not a known actor, who basically people who need the work, who turning down the job means they don't know that they will have one to replace it right off. I'm not going to say going to give 100% leeway, but I do understand. It's kind of like how I'll have sympathy for all the developers who had to work on Hogwarts Legacy. They didn't choose that particular production. They were working at the studio, and that's what they got assigned. I feel bad for them. And I'd certainly, again, you shouldn't be harassing anybody, but I don't think it's even valid to drag them into that. And if you're going to be well, what you're saying would encourage people to not watch it, isn't that going to hurt those people? No, they're being paid for the work. They get paid at the time they're doing it. None of the kinds of people I'm talking about are going to get residuals based on performance. So, no, they will be fine. They'll get to put this on their resume, and hopefully that'll enable them to get work in future. But the last thing I want to do is I want to reiterate something that I said before when this project first got announced. This is such a desperation move. It is so clear that Warner Brothers does not know what to do with this property, but it's too big for them just to let it go. I'm sure if they could figure out a way to buy out Rowling and buy full control of it from her, they would. But I did a whole video talking about why she's never going to let them do that. The thing is, they really have no ideas. They were hinging a lot on Fantastic Beasts, but the returns on that got worse. The response got worse. The reaction got worse every time, and it wasn't worth it. There were supposed to be 5 of those. They topped out at 3. They managed to do well with Hogwarts Legacy, but they're also looking to probably screw that pooch because the word is that Warner Brothers wants to turn the sequel, the follow-up, into a live service game, despite the fact that the previous one was like one of the most successful single-player games and there was practically a big collective sigh of relief from everyone who was like, oh, thank goodness, a complete single-player game that doesn't have a bunch of online and live service elements. And now you're just going to make it a live service again? So, like, they're shooting themselves in the foot with that. But the reality is, at this point, they don't know what to do with this property. They'd love to make The Cursed Child, I guarantee it. But I also equally guarantee that Radcliffe, Watson, and probably Rupert Grint would not agree to come back and do it. So then it's like, it's not worth it. You recast older ones. Everyone's going to go, why didn't you cast the kids who played them before, who are now adults and older and could play the older versions of these characters? So that's a dead end. All that leaves is, well, I guess we retell the same stories again. However creatively bereft you might feel the various Star Wars or Marvel shows, movies, spin-offs, etc. are, they do at least show that there is space to do other things with. Like, you look at Star Wars and you can dislike most, if not all, of what they're doing, but at least you can grant there's a fair amount of stuff that they have found to do within that universe, for good and bad. They've had animated shows. They had Skeleton Crew recently, which was aimed at a more sort of family vibe. There's Andor, which is way more adult and basically strips the entire notion of the Force out of it completely. You've got Mandalorian, which is basically just old school member berries for the fans who wanted that kind of thing. You have this mix of stuff because it's a big enough universe to support all these other things. Harry Potter isn't that. Like, it's just not. I'm not saying you can't support anything other than the main story, but the ultimate reality is people don't seem to want things besides the main story. They tried. They tried with Fantastic Beasts, and it succeeded well enough to limp to 3 movies, but that was it. They don't have anything else to do with this property. This is all they've got. And I fully expect that the first season will do well as a curiosity. Second season will be okay, but it's going to be diminishing returns after that. I expect the thing to fall apart in some way, whether it becomes condensing into fewer seasons than originally planned or just canceling the thing. I expect it's going to start to fall apart around or after a 4th season, because that's where the expense of the stuff from the books that people are going to be expecting, because if you're doing the same story again but longer, people are going to expect you to put a whole bunch of stuff in from the books that wasn't in the movies. The kind of stuff that goes on in the 4th book, the cost of that, the expense of that, of realizing that, and at the very least matching, if not exceeding, the way it was shown in the movies before, I don't think it's going to be worth the cost. And I think they're going to realize that at or just after the 4th season, if not sooner. But that's just a broad overall prediction. To me, more than anything, the fact that they had to cast an American, that felt like a validation that they are having so much trouble getting people to sign on. And that's Rowling's fault. Like it is. Even if you agree with her, she is such a lightning rod at this point. She talks about almost nothing else. There is no way to have a project with her directly involved that isn't a controversial thing that a lot of people are going to avoid just because they don't want the headache. Even if you agree with her, she's the problem in getting this made. I find a mildly sick amusement in that. What are your thoughts on this, John Lithgow? To be fair, and taking the morality out of it for a second, I think he's probably going to be really good in the part. I think he'll probably do an excellent job. What are your thoughts on that casting? What a waste. He will be good, I predict. I'm not going to watch it and find out, but he'll be good, I'm pretty sure. But whatever your thoughts on that or anything else I've said are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills, enables me to do this as my living, even if you can't help me out that way. Like, share, subscribe. They all help me out. Don't worry too much about it, though. What I really want you to remember is that you are beautiful, you are valid, and you are loved. You are the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned. And now to thank my highest supporting Patreon supporters: Robin Moore, Zubin Lutfula, Goddess Elida, Welsh Wrestling Geeks, Oliver B., Melissa Pedersen, Movie Turtle, Ulrich Bogdan, Melinda Walters, Auntie Kate 808, Andre, Becky Sparks, Claire Wright, Fernabilax the Poodle, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperl, Dave Hall, Quite Bearish, Rosalind Bennett, Adam RDL Taylor, Palbo Rabajoggle, Mary Mello, Mira G, and Sir Didymus is my favorite. If you want to see me try and read your name while dealing with these little pains in my butt, check out the rewards on my Patreon and see if there's any that you like.